87%. That's the kill ratio that broke German armor forever. But at approximately 14:32 on June 15, 1944, Panzer Commander Heinrich Müller had no idea he was about to become part of that statistic. In the next 4 minutes, Müller would discover why his Tiger tank, the most feared weapon on any battlefield, was already obsolete. He just didn't know it yet. The numbers don't lie. German panzers had communication range of roughly 2 to 3 kilometers on a perfect day. Sherman tanks, an estimated 25 kilometers of crystal-clear coordination. But what happened to Müller was worse than fighting blind. He was fighting an enemy that could hear his thoughts. Müller's Tiger sits hull down behind a weathered stone wall, the acrid smell of diesel fumes mixing with morning mist. His 80mm gun trains on 3 approaching Sherman tanks, metal clicking as the turret adjusts, standard ambush, wait for approximately 400 meters, fire, kill, disappear. Müller had executed this exact scenario 17 times in the past month, 17 dead Sherman tanks. Today would be number 18, but what Müller didn't know was that those 17 kills had been carefully catalogued by American intelligence. Every engagement location, every time stamp, every tactical pattern. The Americans weren't just watching him anymore, they were studying him. Through his periscope, Müller watches the lead Sherman lumber forward at roughly 25 meters. The American commander's head pokes out of the turret, scanning nervously left and right. Amateur hour. Müller's leather-gloved finger hovers over the firing trigger, feeling the familiar weight of German engineering beneath his hands. The distance counter clicks downward. 1,800 meters. 1,600 meters. 1,400 meters. But what Müller couldn't see was the reconnaissance aircraft circling 8 kilometers away, its radio operator already transmitting precise coordinates to every Allied unit in the sector. Grid reference 5478 Alpha. Range approximately 1,520 meters. Hull down position behind stone wall, single Tiger wire, probably alone. Combat intelligence reports suggested Müller preferred this exact ambush position. Then everything changed. At exactly 14:32 to 15, the lead Sherman's commander whispers 3 words into his radio headset, the static-free clarity cutting through battlefield noise like a knife. Contact. Tiger. Engage. Those words travel instantly to 12 other Sherman tanks spread across a 15-kilometer front. Not the 3 Müller can see through his narrow periscope. 12 tanks, all converging on his exact position with mathematical precision that would have been impossible without the most advanced radio network ever deployed on any battlefield in human history. The equation had changed completely. Müller thought he was hunting 3 isolated Shermans, stumbling through unfamiliar terrain. In reality, he had stumbled into a coordinated trap involving an estimated 156 American crewmen moving with telepathic precision. They knew his position, his likely escape routes, his ammunition count, and exactly how many seconds he had left to live. But what they didn't know was that this was just the beginning of America's radio revolution. If this is blowing your mind, hit subscribe, because what happens next broke 200 years of military doctrine and turned the mighty Tiger tank from apex predator to sitting duck in less than 2 minutes. Müller fires first. His 80mm shell screams across the battlefield and punches through the lead Sherman's frontal armor like tissue paper, the impact sending chunks of American steel spinning through the air. Boom! 1 kill. Smoke and flames pour from the disabled tank. 2 Shermans remaining, standard numbers for a Tiger engagement. Müller allows himself a grim smile. But here's what made Müller's blood freeze in his veins. The surviving Sherman tanks didn't retreat. They didn't scatter. They didn't panic. Instead, they began moving in perfect coordination, flanking his position from angles that should have been impossible to coordinate without direct visual contact and extensive planning. But they had something better than visual contact. They had radio contact. constant, crystal-clear, instantaneous radio contact with every Allied unit within an estimated 25 kilometers. At approximately 14:33:47, Muller hears the distinctive whine of Sherman tracks approaching from his left flank, the sound cutting through morning air like grinding metal, then his right, then behind him. The smell of diesel exhaust grows stronger. Track marks appear in soft earth where no tanks should be. The Americans had surrounded his position in roughly 87 seconds, using real-time battlefield intelligence that made his Tiger tank feel like a blind dinosaur stumbling through a spiderweb designed by mathematicians. This wasn't supposed to be possible. German doctrine assumed tank battles happened between individual crews making split-second decisions based on what they could see through their periscopes. One-on-one duels where superior armor thickness and gun caliber decided victory. But American armor didn't fight as individual tanks competing for kills. They fought as a networked organism sharing perfect information at the speed of light. But what Muller couldn't have known was how deep American radio integration really went. Think about the mathematics that were crushing German armor doctrine. Müller's Tiger had a 360-degree field of vision limited to roughly 2,000 meters on perfect terrain with ideal weather. American Sherman formations had a collective field of vision spanning an estimated 50 square kilometers with real-time updates every 30 seconds. One German crew with 5 men versus 156 American crewmen sharing perfect battlefield intelligence through technology that made every engagement a mathematical execution rather than a fair fight. Every Sherman tank carried what American engineers called the SCR-508 radio system, 80 preset channels with voice clarity that work consistently at combat ranges up to 25 kilometers. German panzer crews communicated using primitive radio systems that functioned maybe 60% of the time, and hand signals that worked only when tanks stayed within visual range. While Muller squinted through his periscope trying to spot enemy positions, American tank commanders received precise targeting data from artillery spotters, reconnaissance aircraft, infantry units, and other tank crews across dozens of kilometers of battlefield. But the Americans had taken radio coordination even further than German intelligence realized. At approximately 14:34:15, Muller attempts to reverse his Tiger out of the kill zone, track motors screaming as 57 tons of German steel tries to escape the tightening noose. Standard German tactic: use superior armor protection and mobility to break contact, reposition, and re-engage from a new angle where the Tiger's advantages could dominate. Muller's driver shifts into reverse, engine roaring with mechanical precision that German engineering was famous for. But as the Tiger backs toward the tree line, Muller hears something through his radio headset that makes his stomach drop to his boots. Something that would haunt every German tank commander who survived to tell the story. Perfect American English, crystal clear, crackling through his own radio frequency with clarity that shouldn't have been possible. Tiger at grid 5478 Alpha is moving. Block northern exit route. He's got maybe 40 seconds before he reaches the tree line. The Americans weren't just coordinating their own movements with supernatural precision. They were intercepting and translating German radio communications in real time. Muller realizes he's not just fighting blind against superior numbers. He's fighting an enemy that can hear his every tactical transmission and coordinate countermeasures before he can execute them. But what happened next would change warfare forever. In exactly 47 seconds, everything flipped from a tank duel between equals to a technological execution that German armor schools had never prepared for. This is when Muller understood the true scope of American radio superiority that went far beyond anything German high command had imagined. It wasn't just about tank-to-tank communication or battlefield coordination. American forces had integrated radio networks connecting tanks, infantry, artillery, close air support, reconnaissance units, strategic command, and even strategic bombers into a single coordinated system operating with precision that seemed supernatural to enemies who fought using 19th century communication methods. While German units operated as isolated components, hoping for the best and relying on individual excellence, American forces fought as a unified organism, sharing perfect information at the speed of light across unlimited distances. Every radio call created a web of intelligence that made the entire Allied force exponentially more effective than the sum of its parts. Every Sherman tank didn't just carry radios for battlefield communication between nearby units. They carried radio systems capable of coordinating simultaneously with strategic bombers flying at 25,000 feet, artillery batteries positioned 30 kilometers away, and infantry units Muller couldn't even see. Muller's Tiger tank, impressive as it was individually, couldn't call in close air support while fighting. American Sherman crews could vector P-47 Thunderbolts onto target coordinates with pinpoint accuracy while simultaneously coordinating with multiple artillery batteries and maintaining constant tactical communication with dozens of other armored units operating across multiple sectors. The scale was impossible for German doctrine to comprehend or counter. One American armored division carried more radio equipment than an entire German army group. While German commanders relied on motorcycle messengers and telephone lines that got severed by artillery, American forces maintained constant communication links that couldn't be disrupted by conventional weapons. But what the Germans never realized was that American radio superiority was about to get even more devastating. If these numbers are shocking you, smash that like, because Muller's about to discover exactly how thoroughly outmatched German armor really was in 1944. And it gets worse. At approximately 14:35:3, Muller's Tiger takes its first hit. Not from the Sherman tanks he can see maneuvering around his position, not from tanks at all, from 155mm artillery shells called in by radio coordinates that Muller had provided himself simply by existing in that location for more than 90 seconds. The American tank crews had transmitted his exact position to a battery of howitzers, positioned an estimated 18 kilometers away. Shells that had been in the air for roughly 45 seconds before Muller even knew he was being targeted by artillery he couldn't see, hear, or fight back against. The ground shakes, shrapnel pings off armor plating, the smell of cordite fills the Tiger's crew compartment. But that wasn't the worst part of Muller's realization. The worst part was understanding that American forces had been tracking his specific Tiger tank for the past 3 hours, using radio triangulation technology that German intelligence didn't even know existed. Every transmission from Muller's radio operator had been precisely located, plotted on American tactical maps, and shared with every Allied unit in the sector. They knew where he was going before he decided where to go. They had turned his own radio communications into a targeting system. The technical superiority was crushing in ways German armor schools had never prepared crews for. German panzer crews trained extensively for individual tank versus tank duels, where superior equipment and crew skill determined victory through firepower and armor protection. American Sherman crews trained for networked warfare, where every tank was a node in a communications web spanning hundreds of square kilometers, and every engagement was decided by information superiority rather than individual tank capabilities. German doctrine emphasized building better tanks with thicker armor and bigger guns. American doctrine emphasized building better systems that made every tank exponentially more effective through shared intelligence. In modern warfare, the better system always wins against individual excellence. But Muller was about to discover that American radio coordination could do something that would shatter everything he understood about armored warfare. Muller's Tiger mounts a desperate counterattack, charging directly at the nearest Sherman position, hoping to use superior armor protection and firepower to smash through enemy lines before more artillery arrived. Classic German blitzkrieg tactics that had dominated European battlefields for 3 years. Engine roaring, tracks chewing up earth, 88mm guns swinging toward the closest American tank. But at approximately 14:35:45, something happens that shatters everything Muller thought he understood about tank combat and changes the nature of armored warfare forever. The Sherman tanks don't fight him individually, like German doctrine assumed all tank combat worked. They don't even fight him as a coordinated unit attacking from multiple angles. All 12 American tanks fire simultaneously at predetermined target points on his Tiger's armor that had been calculated, shared, and confirmed through radio coordination before Muller even started his charge. Not random shots hoping to penetrate thick German armor, not even aimed shots based on crew skill and experience. Coordinated shots aimed at specific weak points, identified by battlefield reconnaissance and transmitted to every gun crew in real time with mathematical precision that turned tank combat into applied geometry. 12 76mm shells, impacting the same target areas within a 2-second window. Focused firepower, guided by shared intelligence and executed with clockwork precision that no individual tank crew could match. No tank armor in 1944 could withstand that kind of coordinated firepower. Not even the mighty Tiger I with its legendary protection that had made German armor famous for individual superiority. What happened next broke everything they knew about armored combat forever. Muller's Tiger doesn't just get disabled or forced to retreat like in individual tank duels. It gets systematically dismantled by American crews who had rehearsed this exact engagement scenario dozens of times using radio-coordinated tactics that German armor schools didn't even know were possible. But the kill ratio that would define the rest of the war was even more devastating than the tactical implications. 87%. Not 87% German kills against supposedly inferior American tanks. 87% American kills against German armor that was superior in every individual measurement. German panzer crews, despite having better individual tanks, superior armor protection, more powerful guns and more experienced crews, were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't coordinate against, and couldn't escape from. The numbers were brutal and got worse the more German commanders analyzed them. Average German panzer crew survived an estimated 6 to 8 combat engagements before being killed or disabled. Average Sherman crew with radio coordination, an estimated 15-20 engagements, not because Sherman tanks had better armor or bigger guns than Tigers, because Sherman crews never fought alone. But here's the number that ended German armor supremacy forever. An estimated 87% of German tank losses in Normandy weren't from mechanical failures, fuel shortages, or superior enemy firepower. They were from fighting an enemy that had evolved beyond individual tank combat into networked warfare where information dominated everything else. The equation was simple but devastating. German armor fought as individual tanks relying on superior equipment and crew training. American armor fought as a coordinated system where every tank was exponentially more effective because of shared intelligence. In modern warfare, mathematical coordination beats individual superiority every single time. At approximately 14:36:12, Muller's Tiger burns, not from a heroic tank duel between equally matched opponents testing skill and courage, not from lucky shots or mechanical failure or crew error, from mathematical inevitability. 12 Sherman tanks with perfect coordination versus 1 Tiger tank fighting blind was never really a contest. It was an execution scheduled by radio and carried out with scientific precision. The 87% kill ratio wasn't an accident or lucky streak. It was the inevitable result of systems warfare defeating individual excellence. Tell me in comments, could you make tactical decisions knowing the enemy hears every word you transmit and coordinates responses faster than you can think? German armor doctrine had to be completely rewritten after encountering American radio tactics in Normandy. Panzer crews who had terrorized enemy forces from Poland to France suddenly found themselves helpless against an enemy that fought with what seemed like telepathic precision, but was actually just superior technology applied systematically. Reports suggest that by August 1944, German panzer crews felt like they were fighting supernatural enemies. American armor appeared at impossible locations with perfect timing, demonstrated knowledge of German positions before engaging, and coordinated attacks with precision that violated everything they understood about tank warfare limitations. What they were really fighting was 20th century information warfare using 19th century individual combat tactics. The mathematics of modern warfare had changed forever, and German doctrine never adapted fast enough to survive the revolution. But what German High Command never fully grasped was the industrial scale of American radio production that made the 87% kill ratio inevitable. Combat reports indicate that by 1944, American factories were producing more military radio equipment in a single month than Germany manufactured in an entire year. Every Sherman tank rolling off Detroit assembly lines carried communications gear that cost more than most German armored vehicles and worked with reliability that German engineers couldn't match under wartime conditions. The industrial numbers were staggering and changed everything about modern warfare's economic requirements. American armored divisions deployed with redundant communication networks that could maintain perfect coordination even after losing an estimated 60% of their radio equipment. German panzer divisions lost all tactical coordination after losing their single command vehicle. This wasn't just technological superiority. This was systematic warfare doctrine built around information dominance rather than firepower supremacy. While German engineers focused obsessively on building bigger guns and thicker armor, American strategists focused on building networks that made every individual tank exponentially more effective through shared battlefield intelligence. The psychological impact on German crews was more devastating than the physical losses. Panzer commanders who had terrorized European battlefields for 3 years suddenly felt hunted and helpless in every engagement. They couldn't move without being detected by radio triangulation. They couldn't communicate without being intercepted and translated. They couldn't fight without facing coordinated responses that seemed to anticipate their every tactical decision. Muller's engagement became a standard case study in American armor schools after the war, not because it was unusual or exceptional, but because it was typical. German armor losses in Normandy weren't anomalies caused by mechanical failures or superior enemy firepower. They were the predictable result of fighting an enemy that had evolved beyond individual tank combat into networked warfare where information sharing determined victory. The final irony was crushing for German armor doctrine that had dominated European warfare. German Tiger tanks were individually superior to Sherman tanks in almost every measurable way. Better armor protection, bigger guns, more advanced mechanical engineering, superior crew training for individual combat scenarios. But in actual battlefield conditions, Sherman formations destroyed German armor with methodical efficiency because they fought as a coordinated system instead of isolated individuals competing for kills. Radio superiority created a multiplication effect that German armor could never overcome through individual excellence alone. One American tank with radio coordination was equivalent to approximately 3 German tanks fighting individually. An American platoon with radio networks was equivalent to a German company operating with primitive communications. The mathematics of modern warfare had changed forever, and German doctrine never adapted fast enough to survive the revolution that made individual tank excellence irrelevant. The 87% kill ratio represented more than tactical success against a specific enemy. It represented the moment when warfare evolved from individual skill competitions to systems integration challenges. German armor excelled at the former, but couldn't compete in the latter because their entire doctrine was built around individual tank superiority. American forces turned every engagement into a mathematical problem solved through superior information sharing, and mathematics always wins against individual heroics. No matter how skilled or well-equipped the individual combatants might be. Subscribe for more stories that'll change how you see war, because what happened to Muller happened to thousands of German crews who discovered too late that superior tanks mean nothing against superior systems in modern warfare. In the end, it wasn't about building better individual tanks with thicker armor and bigger guns. It was about building better coordination systems that made every tank exponentially more effective. American armor didn't achieve victory through superior individual firepower or better crew training. They won by turning warfare into a science of perfect information sharing, and German armor never developed counter-tactics fast enough to survive the technological revolution that made individual tank excellence irrelevant to victory. They had superior tanks individually. Americans had superior systems collectively. In modern warfare, systems integration always defeats individual excellence. The 87% kill ratio proved it mathematically, and Müller's Burning Tiger demonstrated it viscerally to every German crew that survived to tell the story of how radio waves conquered steel armor.